to the 2021 JourneyTEAM Business Technology Summit. My name's Ed Robertson. I'm going to be one of your hosts as we go through this session today. So we'll get you introduced to what's going on. Today we're going to be talking about Azure App Modernization, what tricks, tips, and ideas you need to know to move apps into the Azure platform. And today's your lucky day because you got two of the best in the business. You've got Mr. James Bazar, who's one of our cloud solutions architects here at JourneyTEAM. You've got Eric Roth, who is the director of our cloud solutions practice, and little old me, I'm Ed Robertson, director of business development. Kind of the focus of this session is going to be a selection of some of our best and favorite tidbits and nuggets, ideas as you work into the Azure environment. It's focused and perhaps targeted to developers and architects who are building or designing modern cloud applications. We're going to cover tips and tricks, best practices, ideas to help you simplify your Azure workloads. This session will help cover things that you should be aware of or things that you might have missed as you work through your Azure environments. And as we jump forward here, we'll talk about a little bit of housekeeping. So this session, as I mentioned before, is being recorded. And as such, it'll be made available to all attendees after this event. You'll be muted, which you are. However, if you have questions, please put them into the chat and we'll respond to them in the chat as quickly as possible. If you are having any sort of connectivity problems, heaven forbid, please use the chat or contact our event support at journeyteam.com/BTS support. And then one other ask that we have for you is that near the end of this session, we're going to ask you to participate in a short survey. It's about 4 questions, I think, online. And filling out that survey also gives you an entry into hourly drawings that we're having for some pretty cool gift cards. And then you'll also receive an additional entry into a drawing that we're having for a new Surface 4 laptop. So, with that, maybe I can give you a little bit of background on JourneyTEAM, and then we'll jump into the meat of the matter here. JourneyTEAM in and of itself is about 120 people, and it's actually growing. So actually, as of today, that number is probably closer to 122. Over the last 12 months, we've worked with over 300 active customers. We've been around for about 27 years. So we've seen a fair amount of evolution in the Microsoft space and throughout the IT industry. We are a Microsoft systems integration partner. And in that capacity, we've actually been the Microsoft Partner of the Year for 2 years. We've been identified in Utah and nationwide, and this has been pretty cool as one of the best places to work 3 years running. We've completed in the last 5 years or so over 1,300 projects. So Eric and James and his counterparts in our practice areas stay pretty stinking busy. We are a full service Microsoft systems integrator, and that covers really the entirety of the Microsoft enterprise solution stack. And within that, we've got 14 gold and silver Microsoft competencies. We've got 90+% of our customers are referenceable. So hopefully that says that we're doing something right out there as we move forward. This is a bit of an eye chart. If you can see that, if you can't see it, I'm going to walk you through it, but it talks to our 6 core practices within the JourneyTEAM family. Our enterprise resource planning group, which covers the Dynamics 365 world on both the legacy on-prem applications out there, as well as the modern cloud versions on the Business Central and finance and supply chain. So the mid-market solution within that ERP stack, as well as the large-scale enterprise solution set there. Our CRM practice covers marketing, sales, customer service, call center, field service, all of those areas within the Microsoft Dynamics world relating to customer relationship management. Central to what we're going to be talking about today is our cloud practice, headed up by Eric Roth here, who's going to be giving you some more information. But that covers all of the Microsoft Modern Workplace cloud strategy, security, which is the identity and access management, collaboration, and all of those sub-tier sets of information that fit within the Microsoft cloud universe. That also includes our Azure practice as well. So that's where James is attached, and Eric. Other practice, our collaboration and content practice, also known as our SharePoint practice, covers all things SharePoint, including information architecture, knowledge management, intranet design and development, and all things relating to collaboration there. Our BI practice covers data and business intelligence, and so that's the Power Platforms or Power BI, Power Automate, Power Apps, Power Virtual Agent, all of those areas relating to information architecture and analytics. And then overlying all of our activity is our change management and adoption practice, because quite honestly, what we found over the years is that the technology architected correctly and deployed correctly tends to work as advertised. Where deployments and where these integrations start to run into problems is with the people side of not taking into account the culture and the history and also just enterprise idiosyncrasies to make sure that we're taking into account the people part of technology and meeting them where they are and bringing them to where they want to be. So with that, I'll just start by giving you the end, but I'm going to come back to this. This survey link I'm going to be dropping into the chat so that it's actually active towards the end, but that's the one that we talked about. And we'll ask for your help on that. But without further ado, I'm gonna turn this over to Eric and James and have them take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We are excited to be here. Let me get my session teed up here. Right here it comes. All right. And we should be live here in just a second. All right, we are seeing BTS Summit 2021, right? And our slide deck here, Azure App Modernization. So let's get into it here. Thanks to you all for joining. We don't have a huge audience, so any questions, comments, feedback, whatever, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will talk to whatever you're interested in, okay? If it's not on the deck, doesn't mean you can't ask the question, all right? If James doesn't know the answer, he'll look it up while the question's asked and have it to you. So anyway, all right, just who I am. I run our cloud practice here at JourneyTEAM. I've been here for, I can't remember, 7+ years, something like that. And Azure is included in our cloud practice today. And so that's my role here at JourneyTEAM. And I have a great group of team members that I get to work with. And I'll let James introduce himself there. Go ahead, James.
My name's James Bysar. I've been here a little over a year now, working on Azure solutions. It's been great.
He does Azure, and more Azure, along with some security stuff in Surprise Azure. So it's great to having a dedicated team member that just focuses on the Azure side and really nothing in the Microsoft 365 side as far as Office 365 and stuff. James is on the Azure side of the fence. So that's us, and that's who you're going to be talking to today. So let's get into what our agenda is today. We're going to talk about migration scenarios. What is Azure App Modernization, just to define that and make sure we're on the same page. The business value and the quote triggers that may lead you down this path of modernizing your Azure apps. The overall approach that we like to take on that, tips and tricks, and the key takeaways from this session. Okay, James and I will kind of tag team and go back and forth on this session. So let's get into migration scenarios. So the first thing to kind of look at here is if you look at these rows here, There's virtual machines anywhere from Windows, Linux, virtual desktops, right? That whole category of OSs, we'll say. Then we move into the app space, ASP.NET, Java, PHP, the list goes on and on there. Different types of apps and how they're developed out. There's, of course, the data layer. We'll have SQL databases, we'll have NoSQL or open source databases. There's analytic aspects of data. And then the hybrid side, there's an Azure Stack component. Think Azure running in your own data center on your equipment. Of course, there's VMware, and there's a pretty good story on VMware running in Azure. We've actually got a project going on right now where we're working on that. And then there's some specific workloads. These are more specialty things on the right. JourneyTEAM doesn't do the NetApp or the SAP or the mainframe stuff. Secure workloads, that applies to everything, in my opinion. So, but we don't do the specializations around like NetApp or SAP HANA running in Azure. If you have that, then we haven't matured into that model yet. So the things we're going to be mainly talking about today are the app modernizations. Okay, we'll talk a little about some of the patterns of VMs moving to Azure, but for the most part, we're going to stick to web apps and modernizing those. Of course, there's data points that those web apps are going to hook into, so we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Okay. All right. So, what is app modernization? Okay. I like to think of it as the evolution from infrastructure as a service, then over to platform as a service, and now into serverless models. A lot of times you'll hear me say IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, right? And SaaS would be applicable when you are producing a piece of a product or something that you're going to have externally accessible to customers. Serverless goes in line with SaaS, but for this use case, typically they'll be interchangeable a lot. Okay, serverless goes beyond SaaS a little bit, in my opinion, and we'll talk about that. So the microservices patterns, that's kind of a newer buzzword as far as APIs and where services run in monolithic patterns versus microservices. And we'll get into some of the microservices architectures. We talk about app modernization a little bit more, but that's definitely a piece of what we mean here when we say app modernization. Keeping the data as close to the app as possible. Latency is not your friend. This is important. When we talk about moving apps from on-prem to the cloud, it is sad when I see an application taking advantage of the cloud from a web app or API perspective, but the actual data, oh, we forgot to move the database, or we didn't think that was a big deal. And we're reaching back across the internet / the network / the VPN tunnel / the express route, fill in the blank, right, to get to that database. And you haven't really moved your app and modernized it in the most optimal way. So keep data as close to the app as possible. Okay. Next we have starve the beast. So I'll get a little diagram that describes what this is. It specifically is around the serverless model and microservices. And this will resonate a little bit more when we talk about what is app modernization. Okay, so I've got a deck or a slide that goes over all that. So just to level set here a little bit, let's see, are you guys able to raise hands on the call? Like if I would ask questions and get a show of hands of how things are going? Give me yep, there's a hand, I see, awesome. Okay, perfect. So thanks for participating, guys. Sarah, Mark, Jerry, great. So infrastructure as a service. That typically requires heavy overhead because the operations are still responsible for the various tasks. We probably are all familiar with these various tasks. When you're dealing with infrastructure as a service, you have to patch and back up the servers. You're going to maintain those updates and software updates, install those packages and software components, keep them up to date, and monitor the app. Okay, that's all part of the fact that you've got a kitten running in the cloud. It's your pet, right? And you've got to take care of it and feed it and love it, all those kind of things. So how many of you on the call, by show of hands, are using infrastructure as a service in a cloud platform. I'm not talking a virtual machine running in VMware or Hyper-V or something, right? But you've got VMs running up in the cloud. Mr. Pfister, the only guy that's doing that. Awesome. One person? Okay. Well, maybe that's why you're here. So that's a whole new world, right? Where you get out of the blinking light business. I'll talk about that a little bit. And you've got your infrastructure up. So that's IaaS. Okay. Moving beyond IaaS, we move to typical platform as a service. This is moving up the stack. The cloud provider handles the operating system now for you, the security patches, and even the required packages to support a specified workload or the specified platform. Developers get to simply choose the platform target, such as, hey, I'm going to deploy a web app or an API endpoint, and then they deploy their code. The questions that you then ask when you go PaaS are what size the services are needed. Okay, what capacity do I need there? And how does the service scale out? What are the triggers that say, whoa, I've got this many requests per second and I need more, or my CPUs are doing this and I need more. So what are the trigger points when the services begin scaling out? And when you initially deploy, how big is it? So notice you don't care what OS is running it underneath the covers. You don't have to monitor the OS and the patching and the runtime environment of the actual operating system. That's all provided for you. So that's platform as a service. Okay. The also thing, how does the service scale up, right? So we can talk about scaling out, adding servers and nodes, but there are some use cases where you can't just scale out. It's a stateful application and you can't just add more nodes and it doesn't know how to deal with that. And so you have to increase capacity vertically. Okay, so more memory, more CPU, more storage, things like that. Okay, so those are the questions you ask when you're going down the platform as a service road. Now we go to serverless. Okay, so this further abstracts the servers by focusing on event-driven code. Okay, I get to use these cool little pointers here, event-driven code, and instead of a platform, you focus on the microservice that does one thing. And there are really two key questions for building a serverless architecture. And that is, what triggers the code? When is this little microservice, when is the service going to get lit up and run? And B, what's it going to do? Okay, so that's a little farther up the stack, if you will, when we talk serverless. And we are talking about modernizing our apps, moving them into the cloud. And the word refactor is likely going to be a piece of the discussion. Okay, and James loves to refactor stuff as he puts it in the cloud. Okay, so what's the business value, right? I always like to try to tie this cool, fun, whiz-bang tech back to therefore what's the purpose of doing this? These are my opinions, right? You get to stop operating and managing all those little blinking lights. Okay, so when I say blinking lights, we're talking physical infrastructure. Yeah, there's probably a bajillion blinking lights, but guess what? When that hard drive goes bad and it tells you it's bad, you don't have to go touch it. Microsoft takes care of all that infrastructure. Welcome to cloud computing, right? So you get to provide the benefits of the cloud. So big ones, scalability, high availability, disaster recovery, your business continuity story there. That's what you get to take advantage of as you move your apps and modernize them and move them to the cloud. Okay. You get to integrate with a much greater security offering of the Azure AD platform. I've always got my identity hat on, right? And so you start moving your apps to the cloud, you can modernize the way that app does authentication, and you get all these cool features that the identity platform can bring to the table to help integrate and secure that application properly. Conditional access policies, multi-factor authentication, B2B guest access between tenants, multi-tenant app patterns. That's simply the idea that someone can go to your piece of software, click sign in and say, oh, I want to use this little Office 365 sign in button. And I'll use my existing Office 365 account, and that app is instantiated in your tenant and all that good stuff, multi-tenant app patterns. Provisioning and deprovisioning. Right? You don't have to now build that natively into your app and figure out how to do that. You can hook into standards, and Azure AD can send you user profile data real time. Hold on, near real time. There's nothing real time in Microsoft's world. Near real time. And so another thing, other identity solutions, access packages, access reviews, you get dynamic groups. Ed was telling you how many employees we had at JourneyTEAM. I'm like, huh, let me just go look at our JourneyTEAM community dynamic group that tells me if you're a full-time employee and your company is JourneyTEAM, then you're in the group. And what's the count? So yeah, that's where we get our employee count. Anyway, so that's the business value of moving these apps there. Is cost a business value? It could be when you consider the operational overhead. There is definitely things to learn in the cloud and different ways of doing things. So cost is may or may not be the biggest reason why you would move this app to the cloud. Okay. All right, let me keep my chat up here so I can see anything going on. Okay. So this is a fun part. What are the triggers that are going to take you to say, let's move this application to the cloud? Okay, you guys can probably name some of these. First one is your data center contracts are expiring. Current customer we're working with, they've got a DR data center, and there's a date on that contract, and they want to be out of it before that date, obviously. So that's definitely a trigger that's helping them to say, let's modernize and move some of these backup services to the cloud. That's a really good story there, actually. Okay. Another business or trigger that'll help you get there is business continuity. I just mentioned that client's using the second data center for business continuity, DR. It's a cold standby. So let's move that up to the cloud. So that's another great trigger. So if you have these things in your world, you should look at the cloud. Okay. Cash flow challenges. I thought of myself when I saw that, but I don't think I can modernize myself to go to the cloud anyway. It's if your business is a model where that ability to have that revenue at the right time is an important piece of it, then being able to use that as a trigger for cost management. Cybersecurity threats. You're not sure the security is going to cut it with what you have today. Like I said, that's a big advantage of moving things into the cloud model. You technically don't have to host them there in the cloud, but by integrating them, at least on the identity side, there's a lot of benefits that will come there. Okay, and then there's a ton of security features available in the cloud services as well that you wouldn't get on-prem. You need to scale out that web app in the infrastructure. You are about to see a massive growth in said new product, or the way that your business works is you have to ramp up and down at different seasons of the year. That's definitely a trigger that'll help you say, okay, I need to remove this app. Budget resource constraints, that kind of goes with cash flow challenges. And so the cost of what you're needing to invest in capital equipment and expenditures there, that's not cheap to go retrofit or upgrade equipment in a data center. And so that could be an important trigger as your hardware begins aging out and your life cycles are coming to an end on existing equipment and investments there. Overhead to infrastructure management. So another client that was just like, you know what, I'm tired of managing blinking lights and the overhead to keep all those going, and the power and the cooling and the networking, just the physical infrastructure of things, that operational aspect of managing that doesn't necessarily differentiate your business. And so let the cloud handle that infrastructure and move your app up there. So that's another trigger. All right, so an overall approach here. This is a short slide. I'll talk a little bit about this. Microsoft has recently announced their Azure Modernization and Management Program and Migration Program, sorry, AMMP. They changed the name, surprise, surprise, there's not two M's in it. Anyway, and that solution is a program that they have where they specifically work with partners that are AMP certified, okay? And they have different types of certifications. So the one we're talking about today is specifically modernization of web applications, okay? JourneyTEAM is in the process of obtaining that certification, but it really provides a great framework for moving your services to the cloud. And James will talk through that a little bit with you. But that's an important place to start. In other words, there's been lots of this work that's been done. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let's go plug into that framework. There's lots of tooling that identifies your drop targets. So, okay, how do I then move my SQL database? How do I move my web app? How do I move my servers? There's lots of tooling that James will kind of show you some of that as we identify what workloads make sense to move to the cloud and what does it mean to modernize that application. Okay, so with that, almost James, migrate methodology, sorry. So this is kind of the PM side of you should pay attention to this. Understand who's your sponsor, understand the overall strategy and why we're moving to the cloud, define your plan, get ready, assess your technical skills, your landing zones, and then start adopting and executing on those workloads and rinse and repeat. Of course, during the whole time you're managing, you're governing it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of this whole high level modernization, and this approach is what you'll rinse and repeat as you work through the different workloads. Okay. All right. Last thing I'm going to say here, when I talk about the business value and going serverless, starving the beast, this is kind of what we're talking about here. Okay. So basically, an approach to modernizing your web apps. Okay, James will get more into the covers here, but let's say, for example, you've got a legacy web API and you can forklift that and run it on a server in Azure. It's not PaaS, it's not serverless, right? It's just forklifted up there. And so you got your browser going through your web server, hitting the proxy and going down to your legacy web API. Ta-da, you've just picked it up and moved it to that, right? You're out of the blinking lights world. But you've not really truly modernized it. You're still needing to probably run that on a server, patch that server. Now I need a load balancer. I need 2 or 3 of those servers. What if it gets busy? How do I scale it out? You're manually doing all that. Okay. So, but this puts you in a position now where you can start taking the functionality of that API and calling out and building these little new micro functions, okay, that do one specific thing. And when the app needs to do that, boom, you call that function. And so you lift and shift first, right? And then you start begin shifting to specific functions one at a time and start slowly migrating off that beast of the legacy app, okay? And that allows you to, quote, starve the beast, move off of it incrementally, a little bit at a time. It's very manageable. It's very safe. It's not like a big bang cut where we're going to move everything at once and refactor the whole app and make sure everything's working in the app before you move it. So this is a really, really good approach. And James has done a fair amount of this with one of our clients in modernizing their web app to run natively in Azure. Okay. So that's another important pattern and approach to moving off to the cloud. Okay. All right. So James, I had to put his picture on the slide, so I remembered when he was going to pick it up. James, will you pick up and start talking through migration phases? He's going to take control and drive it out for us.
All right. The first thing that we do is kind of do some planning, and that's where we use a tool that is Azure Migrate that we deploy on site. It depends on what kind of a project that that we're migrating, how this appliance is deployed. But it could be, if it's Azure, like a VMware solution, then they would give us an appliance that you would just load up into um, that host, and then put a key into it, and it would connect to Azure and be able to look at all the different virtual machines that are in that cluster, and you could select which ones that you actually want to assess. It would be able to decide which machines are oversized, that aren't using enough uh, memory or CPU and could therefore use a smaller instance. There's also tooling that would recognize dependencies. So if the said server needs to connect to an API that's on another server that you hadn't thought about migrating, this would expose that. Also, it's at this point where you decide if you are talking to a local Active Directory, then you might consider moving to B2C or to Azure Active Directory for your authentication needs. And then for the migration, you you could use the Azure Migrate for servers, but potentially you're moving a server that only has a SQL Server instance on it, like a SQL. It's just running a database. In that instance, it might recommend the migration tool that, hey, instead of going to up to a VM and using a SQL in on a VM as infrastructure as a service, that maybe we would move it to SQL Azure, where we can use more of a provisioning that allows for scaling up and scaling down much easier. Also, as part of this, there might be some applications in IIS that that could be modernized instead of moving them to an Azure VM where they run on IIS. It could examine and see if the application could be decoupled and move to Azure App Service, which would then give you that scaling ability. Also, if you didn't have a place to load up a appliance, they provide scripts where you can install the tooling through PowerShell that will load the necessary prerequisites on a server that you might have on premise. So you can use one of their appliances or you can use one of your own. After the migration is complete, it allows for you to do some tests. So it'll still continue to sync data from your on-prem servers, and you can hit a test button that'll allow you to spin up that server and see how things are looking. Were things successfully migrated? Can you launch the apps that are supposed to be on there? And at that point, you can hit stop, and it'll continue updating that migration package, so that you might want to change a couple of things and then test it again, make some settings changes locally. And then once you're able to hit the button and everything is working successfully, then you could finalize the server migration, and it would um, send a command to shut down the on-prem server after it's finished copying each piece of the migration so that it's an exact replication. Also, this is where you would make sure that you have application insights installed as part of your solution, so that later on we'll be able to do some performance tuning, as well as any troubleshooting that comes down the road. App Insights helps. You could also set up your continuous integration and deployment, maybe a battery of tests that would automatically run, so that when you check in code, if you did migrate it to Azure App Services or something, it could run some unit and integration tests, and only if they pass would it gate the release and allow that to be deployed. As the final step, hold on one sec, I got a question coming in real quick. For database migrations, doing a lift and shift, if you're running SQL on-prem. So for that, I would say, as part of this migration tool, it actually tells you your compatibility. So if you have an agent running that runs server jobs and stuff like that, that's not supported in SQL Azure. And it'll call that out. It'll actually tell you which pieces aren't supported, and then it might suggest that you migrate to either a VM SQL Azure, or a step up from that is a managed instance of SQL Azure, so that it's a full-on SQL server, but they handle all of the updates and packages and stuff like that. You just have the instance of SQL Server, which is always kept at the current release and is fully compatible with your on-prem server. So that's always an opportunity. It just doesn't allow for that it has to be provisioned. It can't be one of those I'll only pay whenever that database is queried approach. Um, for optimization, we'll use App Insights to see if there is some long-standing queries. We'll be able to see which functions take a long time, and be able to make some optimizations as far as maybe scaling down an instance and scaling it out, so that instead of having one meaty server that isn't doing a lot of stuff most of the time, we have smaller instances that get load balanced and handle the requests. All right. So here is the kind of the overview of how it happens. On step one, we deploy the appliance. It could be that a virtual machine, or it could be one that they already have, and we run some scripts. Then we launch the application on part of that and connect it to the cloud. Um, at that point, it can start looking for and finding servers that are on your network. If it's part of a VMware solution, then you don't have to even point to the servers. It can find them all. If it's just a standard appliance that they give you that you've just dropped on your network, then you actually just give it the IP address and credentials for that server, and then it will start processing that server. It'll take the metadata from that server and send it up to Azure Migrate. Um, you do not have to do the dependency mapping, which requires you to install some tools on each virtual machine that you want. But I generally recommend it. It's better safe than sorry. And by having a dependency mapping, you'll see if you missed something. It's much better even after the fact to be able to come back and review that. And then as part of that as well, the assessment might say that the appropriate tool now should be a database migration assessment or tool, at which time we would shift from the VM migration to the data migration assistant, which would then assist in uploading the data to Azure, whether it be SQL Azure or an Azure managed instance, right? And that last step is that it generates a report that allows you to know the specifics. I think we're going to see some slides for that. All right, coming up in the next one is the slides, but this just tells you for the tooling to assess servers and VMs. That's the Azure Migrate it helps you with on-premise, VMwares, Hyper-Vs, and physical servers. For the migration of on-premise data, that would be the database assessment. And this is what an assessment would look like. This is the overview tab after I've asked for the assessment, and the main thing is that you're looking for Azure readiness on the left. If it's green, it's ready to go. If there were some other issues, then it would call them out. Maybe there is something that I need to prepare on the server before it's ready. And then I could make those changes and then just hit that recalculate button and it'll reassess it. Another thing is as part of the assessment is it tells you cost. And when you when you choose to run the assessment, after deploying the appliance, there's an option that says, do you want to assess this as is, meaning a server that if you have a server with 4 cores and 16 gig of memory on premise, do I want that same exact server in the cloud, or do I want it to do some analysis of the work being done on that server and decide what it feels like is an appropriate size. In which case it's almost always smaller than the one that's on premise. Here's where it breaks out the individual servers that might have been assessed, and you basically group them. You can group them by workload, or you could run them all in one group. But in this grouping, it shows you the cost per server and the cores and operating systems. And then on that, if I would have clicked on one of those servers in that back view, then it would have taken me over here to the details on a particular server in which it's basically said that, hey, for this server, we think that the E2v4 instance is what you need, and this is how much it's going to cost, and it thinks that the tool is the Azure Migrate server migration, and it's suitable for a lift and shift migration to Azure, which is one of them that I said before, where I just hit a button and say, move it to Azure, tell it where I want it to live, and then it basically starts sending it up there. One thing is, if there is nothing in Azure already, and we're working with a customer, or even if they already have some stuff there, and they don't have blueprints in place, we might ask that we put a couple blueprints in place, and those blueprints are basically best practices, and included in them would be a landing zone with a virtual network set up in a place for you to drop these VMs. And also with it, there would be maybe some blueprints that would allow you some restrictions on what you would allow as far as regions for deployment, as well as resource types. This one right here shows as part of the discovered servers, if you want to view the dependencies that are associated with a server, which I recommend. Here, if I clicked on a server, it would say, hey, this one here talks to these other VMs on these ports. And so then that might be like, oh, wow. Yeah, I forgot about my middle tier, and go back and then put a check mark in that box, bringing it into this workload. And that way, when the migration is complete, it exists there in Azure. I've already given you the trick, but the trick is, or a tip is to just get that landing zone in place as part of the cloud adoption framework, and then it basically allows it so there's less work to be done when you do want to decide where it goes. You don't have to set up a resource group, a virtual network, and policies. They're already there. As well as if you are deploying from code and you get your pipeline set up first, then you could have unit tests that run as you migrate up there. And logging is critical. And as part of that blueprint, it's included, but you should be logging your individual workloads. Later on, it'll help for being able to fine tune the apps and make sure that there isn't wasted expense.
And James, on that logging real quick there, do you like to put that into Log Analytics or Azure Monitor as it's called now? Or where do you like to put your logging into for these Azure workloads?
As the for deploying the CAP blueprint, not the landing zone blueprint, but the CAP blueprint, out of the box, it wants you to give it the name of 4 workbooks, and then it puts maybe identity into one workbook, VM logging into another workbook, and it basically has those segregated and broke down into 4 different places to send those places, to send the
Okay,
logs.
so that is using the Azure Monitor or Azure Log Analytics
Yep.
service, I should say, right? Which is just another note on that. I'm a big fan of taking your Azure AD logs and integrating them to that same framework, Azure Log Analytics. You can retain your logs, you can search them, you got a way better view of what's happening from a logging standpoint. And then, like to James's point, as you start moving apps to Azure and modernize those apps, that same framework can be leveraged for the app, and then you can correlate that. And if you have to link the fact that this was the identity activity that happened in Azure AD to when they hit this app, you can start correlating that across that logging platform. So if you're not, so another tip and trick there is if you're not got your Azure Active Directory integrated to log analytics, then definitely look at doing that. It's very, very cost effective to get your logs there. Azure's recently reduced the amount of logging activities that are just kind of fluff junk. And so definitely get your Azure AD sign-in logs and audit logs into log analytics workspaces. If you need help with that, let us know. It's pretty straightforward.
It might be scary if you start logging stuff and then you start seeing the stuff that's coming through. Then you would know. You'd be like, wow, I'm glad that I have this in place because I didn't know that people were trying to log in from this location and stuff like that. So it's good to be aware.
Yep.
All right. And also, Defender for Cloud, officially this morning, yesterday it was called Azure Security Center, at least in the title, but now if you search for it, you search for Defender for Cloud. And that's a good place to go and look at where you're at even before you begin your migration to the cloud. You should note your score, your security score, and it should be better by the time you get done migrating stuff. It might take a dip as you get stuff there, but then you'll circle back and make sure that you're only using the secure endpoints and things like that, and it's best to have a higher score.
James, I don't know if we covered that second to last point about leveraging PIM, privileged identity management. For Azure AD RBAC roles. If you guys have heard me do sessions before, you may have heard me talk about PIM. I'm a really big fan of PIM. It does require Azure AD P2. You just need it for the people using it. But you can roll your Azure AD privileges and roles from the Azure side of the fence into Azure PIM. So that means that you have a really good security and audit and paper trail around who can do what and when do they get the role to then go deploy a new app web in Azure, and how long do they get that role for. And so that's kind of linking the security posture of Azure AD with privileged identity management down into those Azure RBAC roles. And there are many, many, many more RBAC roles in the Azure world compared to the Azure AD roles that sit up on the Azure AD platform. So definitely look at integrating those. It's a pretty straightforward integration, and it allows us to, like, we've got clients that we use PIM with in their tenants when we go do Azure work, and we PIM up and we get that contributor role for the length of time that we're doing something, and it's really transparent, and it's a great service for that. All right, so key takeaways. I'm going to take control, James. The takeaways then for this session here, any custom dev, look to Azure Cloud Services first before reinventing the wheel. And so if you have, I like to ask clients a lot, if you've got developers that are working on something, then they should be working in the cloud, or at least looking there first and having the discussions about what does that look like. It is a whole new ecosystem, right? The tooling and the services that are available there are very different than what you have on-prem, unless you're using Azure Stack, which is a whole other discussion. But look to the cloud first. That's a big key takeaway. Okay, next is integrate your cloud services and your cloud resources, web apps, with Azure AD for its authentication, authn, or authorization, authz services. Okay, there's a lot of offerings there that allow you to integrate that and better secure your application, so you're not doing security in the app. If you see an application where the app has usernames and passwords in it, then you're not doing it right. Okay, just to be blunt. You should integrate that to the identity system that is got the maturity and the technical and security features that you need there. Okay. Um, Azure's a huge landscape of services, and you can always phone a friend. Okay, so I say that kind of jokingly, but it really is overwhelming. If any of you have jumped into portal.azure.com and went to look at the services and take a look at everything there, knowing even where to start and which services you should use can be daunting. Okay, and so honestly, nothing will prepare you better than just experience and getting in and doing that. And so phone a friend, right? And the final takeaway is JourneyTEAM is your friend. And so we want to help you guys, right? We're in business to improve the businesses and lives of others. And I'm not just here to see how much money I can make off people at all. I really want to try to help people adopt the cloud and get the value from it and use technology to help improve your businesses and your lives, right? And so that's there's a lot to the Azure world, and that's our kind of our key takeaways. It is a journey, and you have to be methodical. There is some really good tooling available as you move workloads to the cloud, and whether it's just a pure VM that you need to potentially look at, or it's an application that you've developed, or it's a third-party app that's running and you need to move that up to the cloud. All of those use cases can be done. Modernizing your web apps is one of our specialties, and we can help you get those modernized.